childhood education, ECE, is a vital investment for all countries for our future generations. A crucial element for the success of a high-quality early childhood education program lies in a curriculum that empowers teachers to excel as facilitators in a child's developmental journey. An exemplary early childhood curriculum not only acknowledges the learning needs of children aged 3 to 8, but also significantly emphasizes on the pivotal role of play in the learning curriculum. Beyond mere enjoyment, play serves as the catalyst to unleash a child's capacity to learn and evolve, fostering curiosity, creativity, and confidence. These attributes cultivated through play lay the foundation for sustained academic success and positive life outcomes. In India, challenges persist in optimizing learning opportunities within ECE classrooms. Recently, the Central Square Foundation conducted an insightful study shedding light on these multifaceted issues. I had the pleasure of conversing with Swetha Guhan, co-founder of Key Education Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to ensuring quality ECE for children across our country. Our discussion centered on their valuable experiences and observations from the field of ECE, focusing on the curriculum analysis conducted for CSF's report, Building Strong Foundations, Examining Early Childhood Education in India. Hello and a warm welcome to you, Swetha, to Edge Talks, and we're really excited to have you with us. I wanted to start off with the interesting study you've recently conducted spanning 9 curriculums across 7 Indian states. I wanted to know from you, what are your top 2 or 3 insights from that study?
Thanks for having me, Anustup. And I must say this study has been a very interesting opportunity for us, right? To dive deep into this many different curricula in the early years and try to see what are some trends we're seeing, what's working really well, what are some common gaps. So when we started this study, we decided to look at the curricula based on 3 major criteria. One is pedagogy, which is what are children learning, what are the learning outcomes, how are the activities structured. The second was the teaching learning materials, really what is available to transact this curriculum. The teacher handbooks, the workbooks, a preschool education kit. So we looked at all of what was available. And finally, of course, we looked at ease of use. How easy is it for a teacher as the implementer of this curriculum to understand all of these pieces, fit them together and implement them at the classroom level. So some of the major things that came out, of course, was with our recent NCF, NEP and all of the new outcomes coming out for children age-wise, we were very pleasantly surprised to see that all of the curricula on average were 70 to 80% aligned to the new NCF in terms of learning outcomes. There is a good holistic coverage when it comes to physical, language, cognitive development, and all the outcomes in each of these curricula. However, when you get a little bit deeper into what else is covered in the curricula, one gap we saw was, of course, in the early years, learning is very fluid between the home and the school environment. So we would have liked to see more community engagement called out in the curricula, strategies to involve parents, and we saw that only 2 out of the 9 curricula made any mention of it. So this was definitely one gap. Presence of assessments was another big gap we saw. There are very little mention of any sort of assessments for children in these curricula, even if they don't need to be formal in the early years, something to inform instructional practice, see where our kids are. This was another big gap that we saw. Coming into teaching learning materials, ease of use. One thing though is, again, all the curricula recommend routines for 3 to 4 hours a day, again, fully aligned to the NCF. But of course, when it came to unpacking the routine, seeing how doable it is, we identified quite a few gaps that may hinder a teacher's implementation from a more practical sense. So these were some of the larger insights that we saw. And closing it in terms of one last final point on the ease of use was the teacher handbooks itself. Very comprehensive, but could also end up confusing a teacher because it expects tons of cross-referencing. So one thing that just comes to mind is this one curricula we were analyzing. for a single day's plan, expected the teacher to cross-reference 15 different sections. So if a teacher has to check one page number, go to another book, check another page number, not only will she get confused, the likelihood that the fatigue of the planning will take over instead of getting her to implement with ease is something, these are some of the concerns that we see emerging.
So I want to pick up on a theme which has been there in our reports, which is zooming out and looking at the work of the teacher and how much time does the teacher actually spend in the classroom. And our studies show that out of the designated 3 to 4 hours, only 35 minutes, which is a very tiny amount of time, is actually spent on teaching. And we don't even know if that time is effective, but that's the actual time spent on teaching and learning. In your experience, what do you think, especially from the curriculum side, contributes to this low availability of quality teaching time?
It's a great question. Also, something that really points to the reality of where we are, right? In most of our anganwadis or our balvatikas. Of course, I think curriculum is probably a smaller contributing factor versus how much time is actually available to teach, which could be the larger challenge why we end up with teachers teaching for on average 30 to 40 minutes a day, not even talking about quality. So when it came to the curriculum, one thing that really stood out to us was under the ease of use, where something that we look at, which to me is the most effective indicator of whether a curriculum will work or not, is the daily routine. How well is this routine broken down? Like you said, right, the NCF says 3 to 4 hours a day is what you need to be aiming for as instructional time. But what does the routine say when it comes to these 3 to 4 hours? Most of the 9 curricula said 3 to 4 hours of instructional time. They have a routine that breaks it down into, say, 7 to 8 components, right? You need to start the day with greeting the kids, and there is a prayer, then there is free play time, then there's a math activity, a very nice, well-balanced routine. But something that we realized was there are 2 major gaps in this routine. One that we have to all take into consideration is it does not factor in the non-teaching activities. And this becomes extremely important in the early years, right? Whether it's a bathroom break or a water break or just transitioning from one play activity to another just takes longer when you have very young children. And you have 30 very young children. So if you don't factor those things in, the teacher is actually spending almost an hour a day on average on these things. But when it's not there, we are already setting her up for failure. The teacher is going to consistently see that I can't finish my daily routine. And the likelihood that because of that demotivation, she's going to only reduce how well she implements. So that's definitely one issue that we see. And I think the second one, of course, is more operational, saying a routine cannot be generalized across states. Especially if you're going to place some of these curricula in anganwadis. If an anganwadi only works for 5 hours a day, and is supposed to deliver 5 services other than early childhood education, is it really fair to ask a teacher to teach for 4 hours? So I think it's also about meeting the system halfway and saying in what context will this curriculum be implemented, and then breaking down the duration according to that. So that's a more systemic factor. So I think routines look fantastic on paper. I would love to teach with any of these curricula, to be very honest. But within the pressures of the system, it's a little challenging.
And this resonates with the experience that we have on the ground, that when we go there on the field, absolutely agree with you that the 2 big breakdowns. One is the non-teaching responsibilities. And the second is the fact that there is no structured routine, which is also pragmatic for the teacher. So that sometimes these routines are given, but they may not be structured in a way that the teacher can actually implement. So that's very, very insightful comment. I want to go back to the point around you mentioned around language. As you know, language development is one of the most critical skills in early childhood, and that is one of the most critical skills in the foundational learning years. And we all know that when children enter school without the right foundations, they're already behind. What is your thought around a really effective approach to language development in the early childhood years?
Thanks. I think this is a question I spend maximum amount of my sleepless nights on, which is really how do you balance the ask of the society, the community, the parents versus what the research is telling us about language development in the early years, right? Without getting too technical about it, we look at two languages that a child is exposed to on average in our Indian environment, right? Which is L1, which is language one, or the first language which the child engages with at home or is most comfortable speaking. And then we have L2, which could be the instructional language, which they will be exposed in terms of when they enter school. And sometimes there is an L3, which could be, say, an English, which has become such a requirement in a colloquial spoken language in India. Ideally, all research in early childhood education, as well as the National Curriculum Framework for the foundational years and historic frameworks across the last many decades, have always emphasized that instruction for children in the early years has to be focused on L1, the first language in which they are most comfortable, so that we can then have rich conversations, help them understand their environment, help them explore, ask questions, build upon their understanding of this world. Now, what is getting a little bit tricky is, while all of us acknowledge that children do better in the first language, there is a massive push to include English very soon. We are not even talking about L2, which could be, like, for example, if I am in a state where there is a colloquial spoken language, the spoken language of the child versus the instructional language, which could be, say, a Hindi, itself is different. And now we're introducing English, and this child has to navigate instruction in various new languages. Now, even if this were the case, which it is, the beauty with young children is they are multilingual. They pick up instruction, but they pick up oral instruction. So that brings me to what I think is the ideal piece, right? I think it's okay to expose kids to different languages, but we are exposing them in terms of oral development. So we're looking at building listening skills. We're having conversations to build their ability to use this vocabulary when they speak. We are building their comprehension, because children need to understand what they are listening to, follow instructions. These are really simple milestones actually that the NCF outlines. But a child can do it only if they understand the language in which they are spoken to. Another very interesting thing that is only emerging now in recent research is what really happens when you introduce a second language before a child has achieved any mastery in the first language. Because many of us have often felt, right, that it's all right, people are demanding for English, so let's just have the script for the first language and also put English on top of that. Worst case, the child will take their time with English, and that's okay to layer it. But recent research is actually showing us that if a child has not achieved a certain level of mastery in terms of reading and recognition of letters in the first script, introducing the second script can actually confuse children to the level where they don't achieve mastery and school readiness in either of the scripts. So what we might end up doing by introducing English too early is a major disservice to our children, because they will not achieve foundational literacy in either of the languages that we are targeting. And that is really where we don't want to be.
Well, that was a very interesting insight, both of what you said about the need to focus on oral language development, almost going slow before you go fast. But the bigger point you're making, and I think it's a very important point for advocacy, is that when we are introducing a new language, which you call L2, something like English, which is foreign to the child, you're probably ending up nowhere, because the child is neither ready in the language of their home and nor ready in this new language, and effectively setting them behind. So that's a great point indeed. The success of any curriculum finally lies in how well it is actually implemented on the ground. And our studies show that one of the big challenges of implementation is the number of additional duties that Anganwadi teacher has to perform. Teaching is one of the 25 responsibilities she has. And my question to you is, in terms of curriculum design, what kind of design principles we can keep in mind so that this load on the teacher is alleviated and she can perform better under these conditions?
It's a difficult challenge to address, right? And I think 21 out of 25 and 25 of those are literally probably her recurring duties. There'll be another 15 that will pop up where we don't even know. This challenge is specific to the Anganwadi environment and the Anganwadi worker. And it's very hard to work around it. Honestly, to an extent, we have to acknowledge the reality of the context. And one thing that I definitely encourage we do, and we have been doing over the last few years, is realistically calculate what the possible instructional time in an Anganwadi environment is, given all of these responsibilities. So personally speaking, when you look at early years education as 1 out of 6 core services, our math has often arrived at 2.5 hours of instructional time, if everything goes well, is what is possible for about 16 to 17 days a month in an Anganwadi. So we should be targeting about 40 to 45 hours of ECE in a month at best. So I think where the problem comes in is when we start comparing our Anganwadi environments to preschool environments, where we start saying, oh, they are inadequate. But for this birth to 4-year-old children, the Anganwadi is a beautifully constructed environment. We just need to be a little more open about how we look at learning there. And if we center it around play, coming to your question on how do you make it easier for the Anganwadi worker or the teacher, one, keep that fluidity, have a realistic expectation on how much she needs to do, and also bring in more people. Simplify the curriculum into little building blocks of instruction where it is not only centered around the Anganwadi worker. Can the helper be an active resource in enabling play? When the worker has normally in say 1 day a week when she has to distribute ration, can there be a free play day in the routine where the helper is involved? Can women from the community be brought in to do storytelling? And if the curriculum actually calls out explicit roles of different stakeholders, keeping in mind the limited time the Anganwadi worker has, I think that is kind of the way forward if we want quality early years to happen at an Anganwadi level. Of course, when we look at a preschool classroom level, this conversation changes, where then it's about making it easier for a teacher to unpack, because here you can definitely achieve 3 to 4 hours of instructional time for the early years per day, and you have a dedicated teacher as well.
And I really understand the kind of issues that you're pointing out, that one of the challenges we are facing here is that perhaps we are too ambitious about the expectations from the teacher. And the other thing that you're pointing out is sometimes the curriculum is not modularized enough so that everything is hinged on the teacher delivering and not other stakeholders who can also be included in the process. And that's a great insight. One of the other aspects of implementation is around monitoring and supervision. In a country of our scale and size, teachers and Anganwadis need support. However, what happens on the ground is something quite different, that when they are being supervised, the supervisors largely focus on either checking on infrastructure, ensuring attendance, or pure accountability mechanisms, all of that. And that often takes away the focus from support to the teacher, which is most needed. And now my question to you is more as a practitioner, having been someone who's developed and implemented programs, what do you think should be the ideal vision for monitoring and supervision in our early childhood centers?
Great question again. And we've experimented a lot with what is the role of this external person that walks into a classroom environment, right? That is the question we're asking. Saying whether it is a supervisor in an Anganwadi or whether it is a cluster resource, block resource person going into a preschool classroom, they are a new person who has entered this environment. How do they enter this environment not as somebody to keep a check on the teacher and the kids, but as somebody willing to provide constructive feedback, somebody who's here to enable play and safety for the children, and somebody who's aware of what they are looking for. So one is really the mindset shift that we require within the system, right? Because we do have a culture of monitoring, and it is much easier to check if the books are available, if these things are kept on the right shelf, if the teacher opened the anganwadi at 9 o'clock. These are objective indicators, right? But when we're talking about coaching and learning environments, there is a layer of subjectivity, which in itself is beautiful. It is required given the context and the nature of learning. So it makes it a little complicated. So we have struggled, we've gone through our journey saying, how do you, one, motivate supervisors as well as anganwadi workers to welcome people into the classroom and to also have a relationship that is positive. So I think there's a lot of, while we can talk about tools, there is a lot to be done in terms of the softer aspect of relationships between these different stakeholders. If we want, one, constructive feedback to be provided, and more importantly, that feedback to be acted on. Because this is a dynamic that needs to be solved for. Coming to the second part, of course, is the tools. We don't have a lot of tools in India for this. This is a recent phenomenon, right? Enrollment has happened. The quality conversation for the early years is still nascent, probably not even a decade old. So we don't have enough tools to test. I would actually say rubrics are something we have tested, saying look at the nature of interaction on a 4-point scale, etc. But we have found that rubrics are very complex. So something that I think we can definitely work out is capturing simple data that is not connected to the curriculum, but is connected to the nature of the space. And this is what we are experimenting. Some examples of what I mean by that is, what is the quality of teacher-student interaction? What was the tone she used when she was speaking? How much are children speaking, not only with the teacher, but with each other? How many opportunities is a child getting to access material at her level in the class? These are little things that every adult sees, more or less sees in the same way, and are great physical indicators of what a play-based environment is. And you can't blame anyone for not doing this, but you can encourage people to foster it. So I'm hoping if we start moving towards indicators of classroom environment and not of teacher skills or student skills, then we will actually shift the needle in terms of quality coaching and feedback when it comes to monitoring in the way that we should be seeing it, if that makes sense.
It does, and it's a very counterintuitive insight. But oftentimes we think of this major transition that the supervisors have to make from being checkers of compliance to being this pedagogical expert, and oftentimes that's not going to be possible. But what you're telling us is what is possible is within the constraints of their skills and their abilities, they could actually extend their observation to some very interesting and simple indicators of good practice, and that is doable. So thank you for all those insights. It was a wonderful conversation, especially because we had a wide-ranging coverage from curriculum to the quality of pedagogy to supervision to addressing the needs of teachers, the cognitive load of teachers, and your experience and your insights are very, very valuable.
Thank you so much, Anustup. I think I enjoyed this conversation and it didn't feel like I was sharing that much. But I really hope that more people are able to connect with what we have to share. And I'm hoping that we can make a couple of baby steps and strides towards positive early childhood in the coming years.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join us again next time for another exciting edition as we meet with experts from the education sector who are creating solutions to ensure better access to education for all children. We would love to hear from you. Don't forget to leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments box, and do like and subscribe to our YouTube page for more such content.